So I'm speaking with composer Scott Doherty, who scores the immensely popular Orange is the New Black on Netflix, along with Gwendolyn Sanford and Brandon Jay. Scott began his career writing music for stage productions, becoming part of the musical trio called American Matador, which contributed music for big reality shows like Real World and Say Yes to the Dress. But for the past 5 years, he's been immersed in Jenji Cohen's stylish world of Orange is the New Black. Scott, thanks so much for speaking today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I'd love to start off and kind of know about your journey into music and kind of what were the integral moments that led you on your path to becoming a film and TV composer.
I'll keep it brief. I won't hit you with all the moments. But, essentially music has been inescapable for me my entire life. I gravitated towards the piano at a really young age, and later in life took the path of, the band, typical band player and frontman, and played, keys with a lot of different bands and had my own band that I played guitar and sang with for 8 years. But as far as my entrance into composing, it was at a time when I realized that the pieces that I were writing were steering me further and further away from the music that would get you a record deal at that time. Mm-hmm. I really liked to push kind of in the left field sonically. And it was through that experience that led me to learning, recording software and sound design and sound creation. And I think I just picked my head up from the computer one day and said, this might just be score that I'm creating, and just kind of having that realization. And at that time, these opportunities, just from being in LA for years and playing music for a few friends, and said, well, can you do that for this documentary I'm doing, or could you do this for this short film I'm working on? And I just started saying yes, and then suddenly I was referring to myself as a composer, and so were my peers. It was fantastic. It couldn't have been a smoother transition.
That's awesome.
But I realized that over the years I had collected, I think, little bits and pieces of what it would take to make a composer,
right?
And being a multi-instrumentalist and having the piano as my main instrument, just all those things really helped once I started to get more and more serious about it.
And you did. I mean, I think I was reading that you kind of worked on some stage productions and writing music for like stage plays and stuff like that.
Yeah, there was a few pieces I musical directed a burlesque show and worked with spoken word artist Stephen Connell. And we were lucky enough to be put up at the South Coast Repertory Theater and the Ojai Playwrights Conference that year with a piece that we had collaborated on. And then it was also right around that time that I had done music for a documentary and just had a couple of cues and a song. And the music supervisor from that documentary I ran into a few months after, and she was working for the E! Network. And it was right at that time that I started, easing into being a composer, and just said I'm in a band that does music for TV shows.
Right. Because is that American Matador?
That was American Matador, correct.
Right. So that was formed. It was a trio, and you guys. It was essentially it was a band that you contribute to. Was it writing to picture, or was it kind of creating kind of library music that other shows could use?
I was creating library music specifically for those shows.
Okay.
So we were recruited as composers for the season. And then To Picture was just, we did the theme songs for a few of those shows.
Right.
And it was a great training ground, I think, just to get used to the workflow and the deadlines and, becoming less precious about any one piece of music, knowing that the whole job needs to get done.
Right. And I mean, you guys, you jumped into television scoring, which is the most hectic scoring.
Absolutely.
In terms of deadlines, where films, I mean, sure, yes, some films will have, do it in 2 weeks, but I mean, with television, you're week after week, you have to hit all these deadlines. So that must have been kind of scoring 101.
It was, and I think just to build up endurance and to, really tap into whatever part of the brain allows you to stay prolific without burning out.
Right.
So it was, at the time, I think I wasn't as musically satisfied because we're creating hundreds of pieces of music a week. And but looking back on it, I'm so grateful for that experience because it really just, it got those gears working flawlessly before moving into, an hour-long scripted show.
Right, absolutely. And you did contribute some music, kind of tying into Orange is the New Black. You did contribute some music for a handful of episodes of Weeds, which was also scored by Gwendolyn and Brandon. and which Genji, of course, also created. So how did that opportunity come up, and how did that lead to you becoming part of the Orange is the New Black team?
Well, we had all been in the Los Angeles music scene together and knew each other as fellow band members and supported each other in each other's bands. And they had entered into composing very similar to how I did, but just a few years before. They had a children's band, adults doing music for kids, and Genji was a fan of their children's band. And season 2 of Weeds, they wanted to shift gears musically and seek out a composer for the show. And so it being a comedy, and they said, well, could you do what you do for that kids band? Could you do it for the show? Yeah.
The most kids-friendly show. Yeah.
Totally. I mean, it makes sense, right? Yeah. So they took a stab at it, and everyone loved it, and so they got the gig. And it was, I think the same experience for them of just that crash course of getting into scoring and, asking advice from different people. But it paired really well with the show. They once in a while would have music that was off the beaten path for them, that wasn't in the core sound of the show. And so, they were one of the few people I had passed music to at that time that I was working on. And they said, well, we have this, marching band scene, or this elevator music, or this, carnival scene. And so they were asking me to do, these more left field complex pieces while they were working on their main score. And so we just started developing a composing relationship that way.
Wow. And
then, flash forward, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years later, they had, received the pilot for Orange is the New Black. And they said, we have this show. We can't have the same sound of Weeds, obviously. And, they knew what I was doing at that time. So they said, would you like to come over and, try playing some piano on the show? And just after about 10 minutes of just riffing, of just showing them some ideas, they walked out of the room and then came back in and said, you want to be our partner? I said, absolutely.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was fantastic because we knew each other really well musically.
Right. So when Orange is the New Black started, I mean, what were those kind of initial conversations in terms of what the series needed in terms of music? Because it definitely was unique, at least with tone, because, it can be very heavy at times. It can be comedic, sometimes all in the same episode. So kind of how did you kind of find the sound for the show at the start of the series?
It took a little time. We had some input from production, just as far as knowing their musical taste. We knew that Regina Spektor was going to be doing the theme song.
Right.
So it's just little hints and clues as to just the taste of who we're working with. But it was a lot of trial and error. I think, what we didn't want to do was to step into any territory that felt cliche, that made things more ominous than they needed to be, or, made things too joyous. So we tried to really focus on giving the prison itself a sound. And so it was just, I think there was about a month that we had before really getting into locking episodes. And so we started just with that prison sound. And someone threw out, Tom Waits meets Dark Carnival, meets, lots of really free, open suggestions, which were great. But then we started to discover that it was this, prison is all concrete and metal and things that, sound will bounce off of. And so we started getting into the idea of delays and reverbs, and just anything we could do to create this kind of vacuous, space that would kind of make prison feel more vast and just lonely.
Absolutely.
And then what else do we have that we can musically represent, which was the chaos of prison. And started, finding like metal percussion pieces we could use for percussion, and but it was just mostly trial and error. Yeah. And I think the characters, their own personal themes, we were inspired by great writing and great acting.
Yeah, and I mean, does the fact that the show is truly an ensemble show with so many standout characters? I mean, I can imagine it's hard to come up with a single theme for a core character-driven show, but this is a whole ensemble. So what was the kind of way that you approached? Did that affect the way you approached the series at all?
It did, because I think there's a couple things at play, and one is, yes, the great amount of characters to follow,
Right.
Which Netflix gave us a great piece of advice early on. In one of our meetings, they said, we really want to encourage you to look at this as a 13-hour movie rather than a regular episodic series where, every week it's kind of whatever happened last week musically has been forgotten, that, in the same day someone might be watching episode 1 and 7. So if you are establishing themes, that it'll be really helpful to make sure that they're, we get as much glue in as we can.
Yeah.
So, there's also flashbacks.
Right.
And a lot of characters really step out for the show after they've had their flashback. It's kind of been used as a tool to introduce characters. And so we've used that as a way to maybe start the theme in the flashback and then bring it into prison, and then have the instrumentation of what prison sounds and feel like wrap up into their theme. And then there's also characters tend to change on the show. We started in season 1 with Crazy Eyes, who then by season 2 is Suzanne to us. And She starts off as an antagonist and kind of a scary character. And then by season 2, we're in love with her. And she gives some of the most, oddly wonderful wisdom, throughout that whole next season. So we had to start with a theme for her and then allow it to slowly change as the characters change, as we get to know them more. So it's a lot of challenges, but love it.
I can't imagine. Yeah. So, how did the collaboration between you, Gwendolyn, and Brandon work? Has it changed, I guess, over the course of the 5 seasons? And did you guys kind of look at what each person brings to the table? Did you split episodes, or did you continually work together kind of like a band? What was kind of the approach?
It's definitely evolved. I think it's, initially it was all hands on deck. It was the 3 of us just, scrambling to try to create as much material to get a head start, just to be able to explore and have that opportunity. And that involved being together, but it also involved kind of going to our separate corners.
Right.
And developing some sounds. And then, throughout that first season, I think it was a combination of the 3 of us working together. And then, sometimes would be, if we had just an enormous episode of music, retreat home and write some cues, but we'd always finish them together and make sure that we, operated with one voice.
Right.
And then, it's just kind of changed over the years. I think, if it's a heavy episode, we try to stay, together, but at times we have to divide and conquer.
Absolutely, yeah.
But
and Gwendolyn and Brandon, they're married, husband and wife, right?
Yes, they are.
So, do you ever feel like the third wheel when you're the creator? Like, what if they're disagreeing with something? Who do you side with?
I know I'm the great equalizer.
Okay.
No, it's one of those working relationships where at first it just felt like family.
Right.
I was kind of the brother in the scenario.
Yeah.
But we all communicate very well, and I think we're aware that life has to exist while you're scoring. There's
Absolutely,
no time out for anything. But we're all pretty flexible, and we adjust, and and you just take the good with the bad. But I think if anything, it's just a strength, because with the schedule that we have to keep, there's many times where I just would scratch my head and said, what if I didn't have another partner right now? Because of just the immense workload that goes into an hour-long series.
I can't imagine. I mean, and it's in your opinion, I guess, is the show easier to score in the 5th season or versus the first, or is it more challenging? Like, is it easier because you have a groove now, or is it more challenging because you're trying to find newer ways to not repeat, go over the same old grounds?
I think it's less challenging in the sense that the first season everything was so new.
Right. And
I think everyone was just trying to discover what the show was about. And I think there was a tendency to, just make the cues as dense musically as possible. And it was that compulsion where you don't want to leave any stone, unturned.
Exactly. Yeah.
So at this point, it's less challenging because there is such an established sound for the show.
For sure.
But it is, I'm not as caught trying to reinvent, because the show reinvents itself, whether it's with flashbacks or new characters or new storylines. We often establish themes for just aspects of the story.
Absolutely.
And those will carry us, 2 or 3 episodes, and some really hilarious theme titles with the comedy that's on the show.
Right.
So it doesn't get boring, it really doesn't. And it's, I know a lot of times it gets into, you know, finding new ways to adjust 1 or 2 notes to create a new theme, but I think we are lucky to just keep getting fresh storyline to work with.
Yeah. So do you have a favorite character to write for? Maybe one that you can relate to more than the others?
I don't know if it's a matter of relating. Yeah.
If you were a
I
prisoner.
love to write for Red.
Oh, wow. Yeah, she's the
She's
best.
just so much fun. And, she's, covered the full spectrum of emotions as well.
Yeah, her story is so complex too, and such engaging as well. Yeah.
Yes. And I just think, there's something about, the traditional Russian kind of undertones that are part of her character, but also how she kind of clucks about when she gets excited, and she's just fun.
Absolutely. And well, I mean, Scott, I just wanted to, I'm out of questions for you for now, but I just wanted to thank you again so much for your time, and congratulations on having, a show that's so popular enough that hackers would hold it for ransom. So I mean,
that is exactly the way to look at it.
Exactly.
Thank you for saying that.
Absolutely. So
No, it's been my
hopefully
pleasure.
hopefully they'll continue keep it guarded for going forward.
Well, they didn't get the last 3, so
That's good.
They'll still have to tune in. But no, yeah, there's somewhere in there. It's an honor.
Yeah, somewhere. Yeah, that's exactly how I should look at it. But Scott, thank you again, and congrats. It's such an amazing show, and you built an amazing sonic world for these characters. So
Thank you so much. That means the world to me.